Welcome, everyone. Today we're diving deep into one of the most legendary partnerships in business history, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger.
That's right. The oracle and the architect, you could say, of Berkshire Hathaway.
Decades together, turning, well, what started as a struggling textile mill into this global powerhouse we see today.
And with Charlie Munger's passing late last year, just before he would have turned 100, well, their combined wisdom feels incredibly relevant right now.
Absolutely. And we're not just talking dollars and cents here, are we? Our goal today is really to unpack their lasting insights, things like rational thinking, ethics, continuous learning.
And even just how to live a better, more fulfilling life. It's surprisingly broad.
It really is. And for this deep dive, we've pulled from, well, a lot of sources. You've got biographies like The Snowball, Munger's own Poor Charlie's Almanac, obviously the Berkshire shareholder letters.
Transcripts from the annual meetings, key speeches over the years. It's a real treasure trove of decades of thinking and experience.
Okay, so where do we start? It feels like the absolute foundation for them was this unwavering commitment to rationality and having the right temperament.
Yeah, absolutely fundamental. And interestingly, they didn't just see rationality as, a smart tactic. Munger actually called it a moral duty.
A moral duty.
Yeah, like it wasn't just about getting richer, it was about the responsibility you have when you make decisions that affect others and yourself.
And Buffett's always saying that emotional control, thinking independently, that's way more critical than, say, having a stratospheric IQ when it comes to investing.
Exactly. He talks about his Mr. Market analogy, right?
Yeah.
Treating the market like this manic depressive partner offering you crazy prices every day.
You don't have to listen to him. You just take advantage when he's being irrational.
Precisely. It's about being objective, resisting that herd mentality, the conventional wisdom.
Okay, let's go back to that moral duty idea from Munger. He talked about meriting what you want, didn't he?
He did. And that involves the hard work of thinking clearly, honestly, and crucially, fighting your own biases. Especially that self-serving bias, where we naturally see things in a way that favors us.
Uh-huh. And you can see how that connects to why they steered clear of things that prey on irrationality,
Yeah.
like speculative bubbles or overly complex financial products.
Totally. They just didn't want to be involved in activities that, frankly, exploited human psychological weaknesses. It wasn't their game.
Which leads us nicely into their second big pillar, integrity and ethics. These weren't just afterthoughts for them, they were central.
Oh, completely central. Buffett's famous line, right? It takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it.
A classic. It's not just about avoiding bad press, it's about actively building that trust transaction by transaction.
And Munger had his own take, that sort of golden rule for business. Deliver to the world what you would buy if you were on the other end. Simple, direct.
I like that. And they saw trust not just as, the right thing to do, but as a genuine economic asset.
Hugely valuable. Munger said it simplifies everything. It reduces friction, attracts better partners, makes deals easier. He even said it brought enormous pleasure.
There's that great story about the Forest River acquisition, isn't there?
Yeah, the owner, Pete Leigel. He basically sought out Berkshire because he trusted Buffett. He knew he'd get a fair shake, that Buffett wouldn't try to squeeze him or mess with the business unnecessarily after the deal.
So that reputation, that trust, it directly translated into a business opportunity they might not have otherwise had.
Exactly. It lowers transaction costs, builds goodwill. It's a core part of how Berkshire operates, especially with their decentralized model. Trust is essential.
Okay, third cornerstone, patience. A long-term perspective. This really flies in the face of today's, minute-by-minute market focus.
Oh, absolutely. Munger's quote is perfect here. The great money is not in the buying and selling, but in the waiting.
But waiting isn't just doing nothing, is it?
Not at all. It's fundamentally linked to the magic of compound interest. Letting good businesses grow your capital over time.
Buffett's line, "Time is the friend of the wonderful business, the enemy of the mediocre."
That's the one. If you own a great company, time is working for you. If you own a lousy one, time is just eroding its value no matter how cheap it seemed initially.
So the waiting involves discipline, right? Resisting the urge to constantly fiddle to react to noise.
Immense discipline.
Yeah.
But it's also an active waiting. During that time, you're learning constantly, deepening your understanding.
So you can recognize those truly rare, outstanding opportunities when they pop up.
Exactly. And you're preparing. That means keeping cash ready, Buffett's dry powder.
Ah, yes, the dry powder.
So you can actually act decisively when everyone else is panicking or forced to sell. It's a very strategic long game approach. It requires intellectual engagement and emotional control.
Makes sense. Okay, principle number 4, simplicity. Stick to what you understand.
The famous circle of competence. Buffett's advice is timeless. If you can't understand the business, just stay away. Don't get lured into complexity you can't grasp.
Because often the best businesses are actually quite straightforward in how they make money.
Right. And Munger really valued that too. Simple, powerful ideas. He talked about the 5 Ws: who, what, where, when, and why.
And forgetting the why is a big mistake.
A huge mistake. It shows a lack of fundamental understanding. Their combined strength was cutting through all the jargon and noise to see the core drivers of a business.
And this isn't about being simplistic or naive, is it?
Oh.
It's the opposite.
It's the result of deep understanding. By focusing on understandable models and timeless principles, they deliberately avoid areas where they're more likely to make mistakes.
Munger's search for those big, simple ideas.
Yeah, it wasn't about finding easy answers. It was about identifying the most potent underlying forces. It's a defense mechanism, really, against what he called standard stupidities.
Keeps the thinking clearer, less chance of being fooled by fads or, overly fancy models that hide the reality.
Exactly. Keeps you grounded.
All right, let's shift to something absolutely crucial for both of them. This idea of lifelong learning. It wasn't just a hobby, it felt more like a core operating principle.
Oh, definitely. Munger's advice to go to bed every night a little wiser. He saw it almost as, well, he used that phrase again, a moral duty.
He said it was dishonorable to remain more stupid than necessary. Strong words.
Very strong. And you look at Buffett famously spending hours every day just reading. They understood that school is just the start.
The real learning happens after that.
Exactly. Munger admired what he called learning machines, people who just kept soaking up knowledge. He argued they'd often outperform people who started smarter but stopped learning.
And Munger took this a step further with his big idea. The latticework of mental models. Can you unpack that for us? It sounds complex.
It sounds complex, but the core idea is actually quite simple and powerful. He argued that to really understand a complex world, you can't just rely on the thinking tools from one single discipline, like economics or psychology.
Right, the man with a hammer syndrome. That's all you have.
Everything looks like a nail. Exactly. So Munger said you need to learn the fundamental concepts, the big ideas, the models from all the major fields. Psychology, history, math, physics, biology.
Get a broad toolkit.
A broad toolkit, so you can see a problem from multiple angles. Now, he didn't think you needed hundreds and hundreds. He figured maybe 80 or 90 key models would get you like 90% of the way there for most situations.
Okay, so what are some examples of these crucial models?
Well, one he loved was inversion, thinking about a problem backward.
Instead of how to succeed, ask how to fail.
Precisely. If you know how to guarantee misery or failure, you can just avoid doing those things. It's often easier than figuring out the perfect path to success.
Makes sense. What else?
Understanding basic psychological biases is huge. Confirmation bias, where you look for stuff that confirms what you already think. Incentive-caused bias, how self-interest shapes behavior. Denial. Envy.
That list goes on, doesn't it?
It does. Then you have fundamental concepts like compounding not just money, but knowledge compounds too. Margin of safety building and a buffer for error.
We'll come back to that one.
Definitely. Systems thinking, feedback loops, Occam's razor simpler explanations are better. Second order thinking, thinking about the consequences of the consequences.
It's quite a toolkit, as you said.
It is, but crucially, just knowing the names isn't enough. You have to internalize them, practice using them until they become automatic, part of your natural thinking process.
Build that mental framework.
Build the lattice work, yeah.
And part of this continuous learning for them was being really honest about mistakes, their own and others.
Hugely important. Buffett's shareholder letters are famous for their candor about Berkshire's screw-ups. He always said the real mistake isn't making one everyone does, it's failing to learn from it.
And Munger really pushed learning vicariously.
Yeah, learn from other people's mistakes. Why suffer the pain yourself if you can study business failures, market bubbles, bad decisions throughout history?
History is a giant case study library.
Exactly. Munger quoted Cicero. Not knowing history is like remaining a child. It gives you perspective, context, helps you avoid repeating the same old errors.
And again, this wasn't just collecting anecdotes. It was systematic.
It was about systematically reducing your own ignorance. It takes intellectual honesty to say, I was wrong or I don't know. And that multidisciplinary approach helps identify your blind spots.
So their success wasn't just luck or a few brilliant calls.
No, it was this relentless process of learning, refining, eliminating errors, year after year, decade after decade. Continuous improvement personified.
Okay, let's pivot to how these principles translated into Berkshire's actual investment and business strategy,
Yeah.
starting with that evolution in value investing. Buffett began as a strict Graham disciple, right? The cigar butt approach.
That's right. Ben Graham's idea was to find companies trading for like less than their liquidation value. These might be mediocre businesses, but they were so cheap you could get one last puff of value out of them, hence cigar butts.
But Munger pushed him beyond that.
Big time. Munger argued it was far better to buy a wonderful business at a fair price than a fair business at a wonderful price. That was a fundamental shift.
Paying up for quality.
Paying up for quality, yes. For businesses with durable competitive advantages, strong brands, great management. And the turning point, the real case study for this, was See's Candies in 1972.
Their first big buy of a quality business at, well, not a cigar butt price.
Exactly. Graham probably would have balked at the price. But buying See's opened their eyes.
What were the key lessons from See's?
Oh, several huge ones. First, the power of a strong brand and intense customer loyalty. People loved See's.
Second, pricing power. This was massive.
Absolutely critical. They realized See's could raise prices year after year pretty much, and customers would just keep buying. That ability to raise prices without losing business is incredibly valuable.
They also saw the value of businesses that didn't need tons of capital reinvested.
Right. See's generated fantastic returns on the capital actually employed in the business. It gushed cash without needing constant expensive upgrades or expansion.
And it taught them that growth isn't always good.
Yeah, growth only creates value if you can reinvest the earnings at high rates of return. See's generated more cash than it could sensibly reinvest in the candy business itself.
Which became a lesson in capital allocation later. Buffett even said, if we hadn't bought See's, we wouldn't have bought Coca-Cola.
It was that transformative. It cemented the idea of buying businesses, not just stocks, and really understanding the underlying economics.
And that leads directly to the concept they're famous for championing, economic moats. What exactly are those?
Think of a castle moat protecting it from invaders. An economic moat is a sustainable competitive advantage that protects a company's profits from competitors. It's what allows a business to earn high returns on capital over long periods.
Keeps the competition at bay.
Exactly. And these moats come in different forms. Intangible assets are a big one. Think brands like Coke or See's, patents, licenses.
What else?
Cost advantages being the lowest cost producer, like Geico or Costco. Switching costs when it's a pain for customers to switch to a competitor.
Like changing banks, maybe?
Could be. And network effects, where the service gets more valuable as more people use it, like American Express or, social media platforms.
They didn't just want any moat, right?
Yeah.
They looked for specific characteristics.
They wanted wide moats, strong protection, and ideally moats that were getting wider over time, meaning the competitive advantage was actually strengthening.
And management that understood and nurtured the moat.
Crucial. Management has to understand what the advantage is and actively defend and expand it, because that moat is directly linked to pricing power.
Back to See's again.
Back to See's. That brand moat gave them pricing power. Buffett calls pricing power maybe the single most important factor in evaluating a business. A strong moat lets you earn high returns because competitors can't easily undercut you.
Let's revisit margin of safety. You mentioned it earlier as a mental model, but it's core to their investing too. How do they apply it beyond just buying cheap?
Well, Graham's original idea was simple. Buy a stock for significantly less than its calculated intrinsic value. That discount is your margin of safety.
But Buffett and Munger expanded on that.
They did. They turned it into a more holistic philosophy of risk management. So yes, paying a sensible price is part of it, but also
Staying within your circle of competence.
that's a margin of safety against ignorance. Investing in high-quality businesses with strong moats, that's a margin of safety against business deterioration.
Partnering with high-integrity managers.
A margin of safety against incompetence or dishonesty. And maintaining a rock-solid balance sheet, lots of cash.
A margin of safety against unexpected shocks or downturns. And it lets you play offense when others are retreating.
Exactly. So it's this integrated web of precautions, not just one calculation.
Okay, let's talk capital allocation. Buffett calls it the CEO's most important job. How did Berkshire approach deploying its capital?
The fundamental goal is always to move capital towards opportunities that promise the best long-term, sustainable, risk-adjusted returns. That capital could be profits from existing businesses or the float from their huge insurance operations.
And you mentioned a subtle difference between Buffett and Munger here.
Yeah, a slight nuance. Buffett really loves compounding machines, businesses that earn high returns, and have lots of opportunities to reinvest those earnings back into the business at similarly high rates. Think continuous growth.
Okay, and Munger.
Munger appreciated those too, of course, but he also had a real fondness for businesses, maybe like C's, that generated extremely high returns on the little capital they actually needed. Even if they couldn't reinvest much internally, they just produced floods of cash.
Which then Berkshire could allocate elsewhere. What about returning capital to shareholders, dividends, buybacks?
Historically, Berkshire famously hasn't paid dividends. They believe they could generate better returns by reinvesting the earnings themselves.
That they do buy back stock sometimes.
Yes, but only under specific conditions. They'll buy back shares only when they believe the stock price is trading significantly below Berkshire's intrinsic value. The logic is that doing so increases the ownership stake and intrinsic value per share for the remaining shareholders.
And that C's example really drives home the capital allocation point, doesn't it?
Perfectly. Cease generated tons of cash, more than the candy business needed. Berkshire took that excess cash and invested it brilliantly elsewhere, like buying Coca-Cola stock.
Moving money from a low reinvestment, high return business to another high return opportunity.
That efficient allocation of capital between businesses is absolutely central to Berkshire's long-term compounding success. It's a key advantage of their structure.
Now, here's something counterintuitive. Most financial advisors preach diversification. Spread your bets widely. But Munger, especially, argued for the opposite, concentration.
Yeah, Munger was famously dismissive of what he called diversification for people who actually know what they're doing.
Diversification, I like that.
His logic was straightforward. If you're capable of identifying a few truly outstanding investment opportunities, why would you dilute your returns by spreading your money across dozens of mediocre ones?
Put your money where your best ideas are.
Exactly. He used a poker analogy. When the odds are overwhelmingly in your favor, you bet big. You don't make tiny bets on every hand.
So diversification, in his view, is mostly protection against ignorance.
Pretty much. He saw it as a way to guarantee average results, which is fine for many people, but if you aim for superior results and you've done the work, concentration is the way to go.
And Berkshire's portfolio reflects that, right?
Yeah.
Huge positions in Apple, Coca-Cola, Amex.
Absolutely. Very concentrated in their top holdings. Munger once said something like, if you take away their top 15 decisions, Berkshire's record would be pretty average. It highlights the impact of those few big, high-conviction bets.
But that requires really knowing your stuff, which brings us back to understanding the business and the people running it.
It all connects. You can't make concentrated bets unless you have deep confidence in both the underlying economics of the business, its moat, its capital needs, its pricing power, its competitive dynamics, and the quality of the management.
Competence, intelligence, and that crucial ingredient.
Integrity. Always integrity. Buffett's criteria for people. Intelligence, energy, and integrity. And he warns if you don't have the last one, the first two will kill you.
Wise words. Okay, let's dive deeper into psychology, something Munger was fascinated by. His idea that avoiding stupidity is more important than striving for brilliance.
It's such a practical and powerful insight. Essentially, for most of us, most of the time, consistently not making dumb mistakes is a more reliable path to good outcomes than trying to hit home runs constantly.
Fewer unforced errors.
Exactly. It's about avoiding the common traps that our own minds and the environment set for us. And that ties right back into staying within your circle of competence. Admitting what you don't know is a primary way to avoid looking foolish.
And Munger cataloged all these psychological traps, these cognitive biases.
He was a student of practical psychology. He knew the human mind takes shortcuts, makes predictable errors. Recognizing these biases in yourself and others is crucial for rational decision-making.
Can we run through some key ones they highlighted?
Sure. There's denial, ignoring reality when it's unpleasant. Incentive-caused bias, how self-interest massively shapes perceptions and actions. Always ask, what are the incentives?
Confirmation bias, seeking out information that confirms what we already believe, and ignoring contradictory evidence.
Very common. Overconfidence, thinking we know more than we do. Social proof or herd mentality, doing something because everyone else is doing it.
Buffett's be fearful when others are greedy addresses that one.
Precisely. Then there's undue influence from authority. Envy, a destructive emotion they both warned against. Availability bias, overweighting information that's easily remembered, maybe because it's recent or vivid.
And loss aversion, feeling the pain of a loss much more intensely than the pleasure of an equal gain.
Right, or what Munger called deprival superreaction. People go crazy when something they think they own is threatened.
And he had a term for when these biases pile up together.
Yes, the Lollapalooza effect. When multiple biases are all pushing in the same irrational direction, you can get extreme disastrous outcomes. Think market bubbles or manias.
So understanding this psychology gives you an edge.
A huge edge. Because market inefficiencies often stem from other people acting irrationally in predictable ways. But the flip side is your own psychological flaws are your greatest enemy as an investor.
Munger's standard stupidities checklist.
It's basically a tool to guard against your own biases.
It really underscores that investing success is maybe less about complex formulas and more about behavior, controlling yourself.
Fundamentally, yes. Can you stay rational when fear or greed is swirling all around you? That requires emotional discipline.
Patience is a form of that discipline.
Absolutely. Resisting impulse. And Munger himself was a model of resilience in handling personal adversity. No self-pity, just soldier through, as he'd say.
Let's circle back to inversion again. How do they use that technique specifically to fight biases?
It's a great way to gain clarity. Instead of asking, how do I make a great investment? You invert. What are all the ways I could make a terrible investment?
Okay, like what?
Well, you could buy a lousy business with no moat. You could partner with crooks or fools. You could pay way too much. You could use too much debt. You could invest in something you don't understand at all.
So by identifying all the paths to failure.
You can consciously build safeguards to avoid them. It forces you to think about the downsides and risks, which helps counteract overconfidence and confirmation bias.
Brilliant. Okay, let's broaden out from just business. They had a lot to say about living a good life, too. Starting with finding joy in your work.
Definitely. Buffett's tap dancing to work image says it all. Find something you're passionate about, something you do even if you didn't need the paycheck.
And work with people you admire.
Crucial. Munger agreed, pursue fields that genuinely fascinate you. Find meaning beyond just the money.
Speaking of money, financial independence was a goal, but maybe not in the way most people think.
Right. For them, wealth wasn't primarily about luxury yachts or mansions. Munger was explicit. He wanted wealth for the freedom it provides.
Freedom to choose your work, your partners, your schedule.
Exactly. Independence. And you see that reflected in Buffett living in the same house for decades. They both preached living below your means.
Avoid debt, don't spend to impress others.
Yes. And this frugality wasn't just, being cheap. It was strategic.
How so?
Well, living below your means gives you flexibility. You're not forced into making bad decisions out of desperation. It generates that surplus cash, the dry powder, to seize opportunities.
So it reinforces patience, long-term thinking, rationality.
Precisely. Financial prudence underpins the whole philosophy.
They also stress building quality relationships, personal and professional.
Immensely. Buffett's exercise is great. Think about your classmates. Which one would you buy 10% of for life? Which would you surpass?
And it usually comes down to character, not just smarts. Honesty, generosity, reliability.
Exactly. His advice, associate with people better than yourself. You'll drift in that direction. Munger talked about love and respect being based on admiration, even learning from the instructive dead historical figures.
And actively avoid toxic people. Value dependability.
Sound advice for life.
Life throws curveballs, though.
What about resilience, handling adversity?
Munger's approach was tough, but practical. Soldier through. He faced immense personal hardship losing a child, becoming partially blind, but rejected self-pity.
He said it just doesn't work.
It only makes things worse. They viewed setbacks as chances to learn, keep your head, build character. Buffett referenced Viktor Frankl, finding meaning even in suffering. Munger stressed preparation, anticipating problems, helps you handle them.
And finally, defining success. They pushed back against just looking at external validation.
Yeah, the inner scorecard versus the outer scorecard. Buffett emphasized living by your own values, your own standards, regardless of public opinion or status symbols.
His obituary exercise. Write the obituary you want, then live that way.
Powerful stuff. And Munger added a key piece. Manage your expectations. He thought unrealistic expectations were a guaranteed route to unhappiness.
Avoid envy. Be content with reasonable success. They acknowledged luck played a role too. Huge role. Gratitude was part of it. And focusing internally on your own efforts, your own integrity, fosters that emotional stability you need for rational decisions. You're less swayed by external noise or setbacks.
Okay, let's talk about their partnership itself. Clearly, Munger wasn't just a yes man. He fundamentally shaped Buffett's thinking.
Oh, absolutely. Buffett gives Munger enormous credit, calling him the architect of modern Berkshire. Munger was the one who pushed him definitively beyond Graham's cigar butts towards buying quality.
That was Munger's real impact, as Buffett put it.
Yes, and Munger also really introduced, or at least heavily reinforced, the whole multidisciplinary mental models approach.
But they weren't clones. They shared core values but had different styles.
Definitely. Shared values were rock solid.
Hmm.
Rationality, integrity, long-term focus, learning, prioritizing shareholders. But stylistically, yeah, some differences.
Like what?
Buffett maybe focused more on the nitty-gritty of capital allocation, diving deep into specific company financials, and his communication, especially in the letters, is famously clear, accessible, generally optimistic.
And Munger.
Munger hammered away more on avoiding stupidity, the psychological biases, the utility of the broad mental models. He was more overtly keen on portfolio concentration, and his communication style, well, it was famously direct.
Sometimes blunt.
Sometimes blunt, yeah. Focused laser-like on rationality, good thinking processes, system design. And we mentioned that slight nuance in their ideal business, Buffett's compounding machines versus Munger's high-return, low-reinvestment cash gushers.
But those differences seem to be a strength. Munger as the abominable no-man.
Yes. That role was vital. Munger was willing and intellectually able to challenge Buffett to say, no, Warren, think about this, or that's a dumb idea.
Constructive disagreement.
Invaluable. Having a trusted partner who forces you to question assumptions, who brings a different perspective, acts as an error correction mechanism. It prevents groupthink, combats over-optimism.
So it institutionalized skepticism and the search for disconfirming evidence.
Exactly. Berkshire's success isn't just about two brilliant guys. It's about the process their partnership created, embedding rationality, error checking, and diverse thinking into the very fabric of the company.
What an incredible journey unpacking their wisdom. If you had to summarize the absolute core principles that define their legacy, what would they be?
Okay, let's try. At the heart. Rationality and the right temperament. That's non-negotiable. Fueling that is lifelong, multidisciplinary learning, built on a foundation of absolute integrity and earned trust, executed with patience and a true long-term vision, guided by a deep understanding of both business fundamentals and human psychology, filtered through a preference for simplicity, and sustained by resilience in the face of adversity.
That's a powerful synthesis. And these aren't just quaint ideas for investing, are they? They feel much broader.
Oh, totally timeless and broadly applicable because they're rooted in fundamental truths about how the world works, how businesses succeed, how people behave, how sound decisions are made. They transcend market cycles or technology fads.
Rational thinking, ethics, learning, psychology that applies everywhere.
Leadership, personal choices, navigating life's complexities. Their wisdom offers a robust framework.
So this deep dive, it really feels like an invitation for all of us listening.
I think so. An invitation to strive for that continuous learning, build trust-based relationships, get better at recognizing and fighting our own biases, cultivate patience, focus on what truly matters long-term.
Munger believed the best thing you could do was help someone else know more.
Exactly. And maybe this conversation helps a little in that spirit. And we shouldn't forget Buffett's massive philanthropy, either a reminder that the ultimate goal can be much bigger than just personal success.
A focus on contributing back. A perfect thought to end on. Thanks so much for sharing these insights today.
My pleasure. It's always fascinating to revisit their thinking.